Okay, so we have our sleeve prepped and we have our bodice that we made from before. Okay, so what we're going to do is put this sleeve in to one of the armholes of the bodice. And to do that, we're going to look back to where we've got our double notch. Here's a double notch, and on the other side is a single notch. On the bodice, we'll have the same thing. On one side of the armhole is a double notch, and on the other side is a single notch. Up here, this little short seam is the shoulder, here's the armpit, and there's the side seam, okay? So what we want to do is make sure that the outside of our garment, which is this, right, we don't see any seam allowance, this is the good side, the outside matches to the bodice, right? So here I've got my double notch, and here's my outside of my bodice, and here I've also got my double notch. Where is it? Right there. And where is it? Right there. Okay, so this is where they're going to match up. This is where the sleeve is going to connect. Okay, so what I usually do, because right now I'm looking at the outside of the garments, both the bodice and the sleeve, but I need to sew it with the good to good touching so that all the seam allowance goes to the middle. So what I usually do at this point, see how I've got these two seams, these two armpit seams are going to go together. I can match those right up and come now from the inside and flip that right in there. There we go. So now I'm on the inside of the garment again. Here's the inside of my bodice. There's the inside of my sleeve, and I can start matching these together. See how I did that? I'm just kind of, flipping the bodice around on top of the sleeve. And then what I always do is start with that armpit, right? It's the flat area. It doesn't have any gathering. It's really easy. It matches up really nicely. And I'm gonna put a pin on each side there to hold down my seam allowance, and I am making sure that seam matches up on both sides flawlessly. The next thing I'm going to do, and I can move these sort of gather ease stitch strings out of the way, is go to where I've got that double notch and match that up. And now from here to here should be flat. If it's looking a little like it's not fitting nicely, just kind of stretch it and move it and make it work, because it shouldn't be anything but a perfect match right there. There we go, nice and flat. And I could do the same now on the other side. Get those gather strings out of the way, and I could match up my single notch right here. And this is why we have all these notches, because when you get into the thick of it and you're trying to make pieces match up, notches are your best friends. You can't have too many notches. It's going to tell you where to go. And then same, I'm going to make this piece match really flat and smoothly. And notice how I'm like shifting it with my fingers. I'm stretching, I'm pulling, I'm letting the fabric be fabric. You know, if it wants to stretch a little, if it wants to move a little, I'm trying to work with it. And with an armhole, this is one of those times where you could use 1,000 pins. You could use a pin every centimeter, and that would be fine. More pins, the better, for sure, because you want this to get in perfectly. Okay, and now this is my center, my shoulder, and I'm going to find that notch, which is hard once you've gathered it all up, at the top of my sleeve cap. Where did it go? This is a fun game. I know it's in here. We saw, aha, there we go. There it is. So I'm going to match that with the center of my shoulder seam. And again, I'll probably put one on each side just to make sure that the seam allowance stays put and doesn't get caught. So now, here is the fun part. We know all the notches are matched where they need to be, right? But we've got too much fabric here and not enough here because we gathered it up so tight. So now we can go back and pull out some of this gather, right? So I am just pushing all that gather back right out, back towards the strings where we had gathered it up. And I'm gonna do that evenly, right? I wanna make sure it's super even, that I don't have a bunch of gathers in one spot and then it's flat in another spot. I am looking to have perfect, even ease here. And I'm gonna do it until the two pieces are now the same size. See how now this, that was way bigger, is perfectly set up to this, okay? And so now I'm going to take however many pins it takes to pin these two pieces together. And again, feel free, go crazy. Use 1,000 pins. Whatever you need to do to make it match up, okay? And then I also do it on the other side. And remember, so this is looking way big, and this side is too small. So I'll just push that out. There we go, until it's the same size. And so again, you end up, you don't really have much of a gather, which we don't want anyway. Again, this is not a puff sleeve. We don't want to see gathered fabric. We actually don't want to see a single gather at all. We just want it to create a slightly round shape. Okay, so I'm going to pin these down too. I'm out of pins. I'm going to have to go grab some, but just so I don't have to stop the video, imagine I will pin here, pin here, pin here, and I will have this all the way pinned up, and then I can sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. What I strongly suggest, very similar to putting in a zipper, I suggest you hand baste this, and then you can take the pins out, and then you can take it over to the sewing machine to sew it. Because you will have so many pins in here, it is definitely going to be annoying and hard to sew. And we're sewing now in like this circle, right? So I'm going to have to bring it in here, turn the fabric as I go, make sure I'm not accidentally sewing into this other side of the sleeve. The pins are probably gonna poke you and cut you and hurt you. That's just what they do. There's so many pins, and it's a really tight hole. Like, I can barely get both hands in there. So honestly, hand basting this down, and you could do that at a 1/4 inch, like pretty close to the edge, right? So that you don't end up seeing maybe your hand baste later if you wanted to leave it in, or you could rip it out. But you can hand baste within that seam allowance, and then you can move the pins, and it's just going to be so much easier to sew. So what I might do is go ahead and hand baste just to show you how much nicer that's going to be, rather than trying to fight this under the sewing machine with all these pins trying to cut my hands, okay? Okay, so I have hand basted my sleeve into the bodice armhole. I did not get rid of these long ease gather stitches yet, just leave them. Again, it's one of those things I usually don't clip them like till after I'm done sewing and I'm sure that it's all perfect. Just kind of push it out of the way for now. And I've done a nice loose baste. It's about a 1/2 inch stitch length, and it's about a 1/4 inch from the edge. I kind of went just right on that seam line where I did my ease stitch before, okay? But now this is in place, and at this point you can even test it, which is the kind of nice thing about hand basting. I can now flip to the outside of the garment, and I can see, oh look, here's my sleeve attached. You can see, look, it is matching up at the armpit. We like to see that. And there is this slight roundness happening here, and I do see a lot of gathers right here right now because I've only basted it at a 1/4 inch. By the time I end up sewing at a 1/2 inch, see I'm kind of pinching a little bit more with my hand, I should have something like this where I have this slight roundness, but I'm not seeing all these crinkles, right? I'm seeing it much more smooth. So that's my goal. By the time I sew, I'm pinching it with my hand so you could see it'll look like this. This will be the shoulder, okay? But I'll flip it back because I've got this basted, I'm ready to go, and now I can sew it. So with a sleeve, this is just what I do. I always start by sewing on the bottom in that armpit seam. Again, this is the flat part, so it's a good place to start. And then if I'm gonna have an overlap, like I'll start here, sew all the way around and then go back over it. If I'm, gonna have anything like that, I'll just put it in the armpit, right? Rather than having any weird stop that's up here on the part of the sleeve you would really see. So I just always start right here. And so again, I'm gonna make sure when I'm sewing really carefully that I am only sewing the 2 layers of fabric that I need to be sewing. I don't wanna accidentally catch the rest of the garment or the other end of the sleeve. Let me make sure I've got the red. Okay, so I'm putting this in here at a 1/2 inch. Drop that presser foot. Start those first few stitches. And this is something where you're really going to have to move and play with the fabric the entire time. We've got a curve we have to sew around. We've got a lot of bunched up fabric. So this is why getting those pins out of the way is huge. And this might be something you have to walk, just because you're only going to be able to sew about 1 inch at a time anyway before you have to pick your fabric up and move it. I can try to do a little bit, but I mean, we're gonna have to kind of adjust this every inch or so. So this might be a seam again. You sit there and kind of hand walk it, or do little bits at a time. No shame. It's a small, round seam. So again, if my needle's down, I can pick up my fabric and readjust it. Needles down, pick up my fabric, and readjust. And I'm just really feeling with my fingers that I'm only sewing what I mean to be sewing. Pushing it straight, taking my time. The setup is everything. You can see I'm just taking my fingers and see how I've got like a fold that's happening there. Just make sure you push that out. Pull on it, a little bit. Again, getting those pins out of the way, and it's hand basted, it's not going to come apart. You can pull it up and maneuver it the way you need it to be. Right at the cap here, or right at the shoulder seam, it's another kind of temporarily flat area, so it's a good time to reassess, make sure you're going in the right direction. And you're halfway through at that point, so you can celebrate. And I can see the home stretch, but I've got quite a bit of curve that's still built in here. And then I can see where I started my other seam. Here are the threads from that first end of it. And so I can try to go right over top of that line. Effectively kind of locking it in place. I'm just going to set it up so it's nice and flat. And then it's kind of like the equivalent of back sewing, because I've locked in my previous stitch. So you can see there where I started and sewed over top of it, and I sewed my 1/2 inch all the way around, hopefully reasonably straight. But the real moment of truth is popping it out to the outside and seeing what it looks like. Ooh. So I do have a little bit of a pucker there, like little baby ones. Sometimes I can press out. Like here's the front, for example. things to look for: that my armpit seam matches up, that it's fairly smooth right in here. Here would be where my shoulder lives. And like I said, these tiny, tiny almost puckers, I could probably press out with the iron. The only one that I would really potentially struggle with, I'm looking towards the back now. Actually, maybe now that I look, I might be able to press this out too. See how it kind of just folds? So this is where some steam and some pressing. See how if I really like pull on that, I can kind of make it go away? That would be my goal. And then again, the back looks really nice and smooth. I don't have any puckers. So I always like to say, if you do have any little pulls, if anything, they should be right at the cap. They should be at the top, not here, you know, where that's the front of your arm and the back of your arm. You want that to be pretty smooth. If we were on campus, I have what's called a ham. It's like a big fat, looks like a ham. It's like an iron press. I guess it's like heat safe, and it's full of like beads or sand or something that you can iron on. It's a hard thing that you can shove in here into the armhole, and you could press against it, and I could usually press out all of these little wrinkles. So that would be good. But what we can also do in this case is try to use the rounded edge of our ironing board, because that's what that is for too. And I can try to like hang this over the edge, right? See how I'm like hanging it right on the edge? And I can even shoot that with some steam and try to get those pieces out, okay? Because that would be the goal. And then I can sort of make a choice as well with all of my seam allowance. Now at this point, I could get rid of this basting seam. I could just rip that right out. I don't need it. I could now also cut my gather stitches if I'm satisfied and I feel like I don't need them. I don't need to make any adjustments, and I can make this a little neater. And then you can take all the seam allowance and press it towards the cap like this. That sometimes might like help, or you can press it back inside towards the bodice like this. It's however you can get this, I suppose, to look the nicest. So this is where you're going to kind of fight your iron, and like I say, use the edge of it, use the rounded edge of the iron and press against here to see if you can steam some of this out and get it really smooth. And so what I'm going to do is try to do that, and then I can put it on my mannequin and kind of test it. But ultimately this is your goal. You've got your sleeves set in, you've got it all sewn up, it looks pretty neat. And then the next step we would do is to do the bottom hem of our sleeve. And now as you can see, it's kind of like evening up, but again, my mistaken pattern making, something went wrong here. I don't know, maybe this will happen to you, maybe it won't. Maybe it was also when I cut the fabric out. But what I would want to do down here is fold this under a 1/2 inch, and what I can do is kind of even out where I've got that mistake where it's not flat, right? Fold it under 1/2 inch, press it. I can even do that really quickly just to show you. Okay, give that a press, and then I can fold it under now 1 inch, just like we've done with all the other hems, okay? So it's a double turned hem, folded under 1/2 inch, and then a full inch. And again, I can press that to lock it in place. I suggest maybe just like checking those measurements with a ruler first, just to make sure you're getting it right. I'm just gonna press that down. There we go. But already I've got this nice, pretty hemmed bottom sleeve, right? And I can make sure to press out that hard crease that I made. So this would be the same as the other hems that we've done. You can do a machine hem where you sew very close to this edge, right, to the folded edge, about 1/8 inch from that folded edge, through all layers. But this is a tiny, tiny opening. So this is not really easy to go over to the sewing machine and sew without accidentally sewing through the other side. Not impossible, but could be difficult to do on machine. Whereas if you do it by hand, it's a lot easier to do your hand slip stitch on that, okay? So I'm gonna let you choose what you decide to do, either a hand slip stitch on your sleeve hem or a machine hem on your sleeve, okay? And then your sleeve side will be done. And what we will do on the other side is do a sleeveless binding, as if we were going to do a sleeveless look, okay?